Greetings all and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Industry Support webinar, What is the Future of Food, presented by Deloitte. My name is Victoria Jordan Rodriguez from the James Beard Foundation, and I'm so delighted to welcome you all here today. Whether it's your first time or you've joined us before, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes that we wanted to let you know about. Number one, this webinar is being recorded. You'll be able to see the recording of this webinar at some point in the next week by checking out openforgood.com. Please encourage all of your friends and colleagues to come and check that out, and all of our other webinars that we've been producing here for the past year. We'll field questions at the end as time allows. Please write in your questions at any time using the webinar toolbar. And if you're having any technical difficulties, message us using the webinar toolbar, and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today and introduce you to our moderator, the CEO of the James Beard Foundation, Clare Reichenbach. Clare?
Thank you so much, Victoria, and a very warm welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's discussion. What is the future of food? A profound question indeed. This is in partnership with Deloitte, and we are joined today by three amazing chefs, all of whom are thought leaders in the sustainability space. So to introduce our panel, we have Chef Amy Brandwein, chef and owner of Centrolina and Piccolina in Washington, D.C. She's a multiple James Beard Award nominee and alum of our Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. She's also a leader in our Smart Catch Sustainable Seafood Program. We are also joined by award-winning chef Chris Shepherd. He has changed the landscape of Houston culinary scene since opening his first restaurant, Underbelly, in 2012, which is now Georgia James, and with his more recent project, 1/5, which is an incredible initiative where the restaurant concept changes every year for 5 years. In addition to his restaurant, UB Presser, he also established his foundation, Southern Smoke, which has donated more than $7.5 million in relief to our industry. We're also joined by Chef Joel Gamoran, founder and head chef of Homemade, which provides world-class digital cooking experiences with chefs from around the country. He is a huge proponent of sustainability and full use, with a cookbook entitled Cooking Scrappy and a TV hit show Scraps, where he makes scraps the star of the dish and indeed star of the show. I'm also delighted to be joined by Jean Chick, a principal at Deloitte, and their restaurant and food service industry leader. Deloitte is a strategic partnership of the James Beard Foundation in the food leadership space, and sustainability is a core focus, and we're so grateful for our partnership. So thank you, Jean, for joining this panel this afternoon. So over a year ago, before the pandemic hit, we asked this group to share their vision of what the future of food might look like. So a year on, and boy, what a year on, the world looks profoundly different. So we're using this afternoon to reflect on how that vision may have changed. How do we use this unique moment in time to propel the food industry into a more sustainable future? What positive elements may have been accelerated in the last year, and what new challenges may have arisen? Before we get into those questions and visions, by way of context and kickoff, I'd just like each of the chefs to share what the state of their business is right now, given the year we've just had. Chris, maybe we would be kind enough to kick us off.
Yeah, so Texas is open at 100%. Doesn't mean we do that. All of our restaurants are at 50%. You know, staffing is always an issue, but you know, the states are getting back, or the city's getting back to, you know, going back out and dining. But we just, you know, once we have offices opening up and the oil business back to where it needs to be, then we'll be in a good spot. But till then, we're just hanging in there and doing what we got to do. Keep our staff safe and healthy.
Indeed, thank you. And Chef Amy, where are you at in DC?
Thanks for having me. So we're at 25% capacity right now. We've been at that most of the pandemic, except when we were completely banned. You know, DC is slow getting back to normal. You know, where businesses are not quite coming back to work yet. So, you know, we're trying to be innovative and make sure that we can connect with our customers. And generally things are on the upswing, but far from normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel, a different type of business, but to share with us where you're at.
Yeah, so I'm in consumer-facing business, really inspiring people to cook more. And I was traveling the country a lot before the pandemic, and since then I turned my garage, which is where I am today, into a cooking studio where I can really virtually reach thousands of people. So business is actually booming in a good way because the interest in cooking at home has really taken off. So lots to share there, but it's been a really influx in people who are not just interested in cooking, but cooking sustainably and thoughtfully.
Wonderful. Look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you. So to kick off, Jean, we'd love to hear a bit more in terms of Deloitte's stake in the future of food. Why is this such a passion point and focal point? And why was it important for you back in 2019? And does that still resonate and have currency today?
Well, it was very important in 2019, and for us to take a look at what consumers thought about the future of food, but even more importantly, sustainability. I think sustainability is very important for us as a firm, and broad masses, people think about climate change, they think about carbon footprint when they think about sustainability, but food and the future of food and food sustainability impacts every single one of us on a daily basis. And so it's very important for us to bring this to the forefront, bring awareness to the future of food, sustainability as it relates to food, not just carbon footprint or climate change. So it's very important for us. We're also very big on supporting our communities with locally grown food, locally owned restaurants. My clients that I work with in the restaurant industry, it's very important for them, anywhere from sourcing food all the way to packaging. So very important through the whole food supply chain. So
right, throughout the supply chain and those different definitions of sustainability. Thank you. So just reflecting back on last year when we consulted this group, we heard a lot of those themes that Jean, you've just been referring to in terms of local supplier relationships, transparency of supply, and focus on humanly raised produce. COVID exposed the vulnerability of our industry in many ways, including the vulnerability of such a highly concentrated and centralized supply chain. And it felt like the local relationships became more important than ever over the last year. I'm looking to Amy and Chris. You operate restaurants in very busy urban areas, DC, Houston, respectively. How did the pandemic change your sourcing practices and relationships?
I think for me, it just made it even more important to, make sure that we're supporting the local businesses in our area. So we've always done this, but it became very apparent that, our local suppliers, farmers, and businesses were much more able to turn the switch. And it really kind of brought about an awareness that our local, farmers and those types of partners have the ability to do much more than they're currently doing if we support them.
What kind of diversification did you see?
Well, it goes everywhere from, connecting with, a local farm that supplies us with beef and pork, all the way to our florist who supplied us with eggs and things like that. And so, really thinking outside the box and trying to keep all the supply chains going.
And Chris, what was your experience in terms of the supplier dynamics and relationships?
It was right at the beginning of this. The farmers were the first ones to ask, what do you need? They were the first ones to be there to support. Like, what do you need? Feed your staff, feed your guests. You can't do your guests, but what can we do? And we made sure our staff was fed completely every day. And so our farmers would just bring in, we would do hot meals, and then they would bring in produce for the team. And then we had the opportunity to, put food into HEB, one of our grocery stores. And so, they asked us to help with this Meal Simple project that they were doing, where it's more of a take and bake type thing. And that's what our entire management staff did. But when we made that decision to do that, we wanted to make sure that we did an impact onto our local community as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were sourcing the things from people that we've been sourcing from. It wasn't about cutting corners. It was about sticking to what we do all of the time. And if we're going to make an impact, if this grocery store is going to make an impact on us, we need to make an impact on them as well. And so it was very conscious about how we went about doing that and making sure that we still, hey, you have a lot of grind. Let's use your beef. You have this. Let's use this. Let's use, you know, and it was making sure that we could still support the food chain, because no matter what happened at the end of this, we need to make sure that that food supply chain is still available.
Very
and did
much.
we lose farmers? Yeah, we did. Some of them just have gone into hibernation mode until this is done. So, but hopefully they'll come back.
A good reciprocal loyalty and support with the existing relationships. And in terms of innovations that arose during COVID, and like diversification of supply, people moving into different spaces, what elements of that do you think will sustain going forward?
I think a good percentage of it will. I think we've taught our consumers and the guests to kind of think outside of the box, not just restaurants, but I think as chefs, we have learned a whole lot of new things, you know, Zoom classes, you know, putting things into wholesale, retail, but also making sure, you know, that we're still sourcing everything that we possibly can, because, you know, when grocery stores and you couldn't go get beef, I didn't have a problem, because my guy and my team we've been working with for, you know, farming forever, was like, I'm not going to sell to anybody. I'm going to sell to you. Like, you will have what you need no matter what. And so it really, you know, relationships go a long way. And that's, you know, as long as we can continue to, you know, do that, that's the best thing we can possibly do.
The power of local relationships, indeed. So thinking about sustainability has many dimensions and many interpretations. And as Jean, as you said, when we were talking about this last year, it was very much centered in terms of the environmental component of sustainability. But as we think about, you know, things being sustainable for the planet, yes, but what about sustainable for people, and what about sustainable business models? Given the year we've just had, do you think the emphasis or the center of gravity about when we're talking about sustainability has shifted? Maybe Jean, I'll start with you, and then maybe we'll go to Joel.
Yeah, I definitely think it's shifted. I mean, it's still the same premise from back in 2019, but you have a whole complete overlay of safety and freshness, and you know, complete change in consumers' mindset as far as where do they want their food sourced, how do they want it sourced. I want to know exactly where it came from. I want to know the safety protocols around that, and feel comfortable with the food choices that I'm making and where is it sourced. So we've seen that. We did another consumer survey in 2020 where 9 out of 10 people said they wanted fresh food. It made them happy, and they also felt safer for, you know, eating, consuming fresh food, and that includes, you know, understanding where it came from, understanding the practices about caring for the food, obtaining the food, procuring it. And so we've seen a huge shift of the underlying that we had in 2019, but an overlay of safety and sourcing, really understanding where it's coming from, and a heightened sensitivity to wanting fresh food.
Thank you. Joel, what's been your experience?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's funny. It's before the pandemic. I mean, obviously, we're all talking about sustainability and transparency. And what I said in the James Beard videos, I believe transparency is the future of food. I think people want to know where that food is coming from, but especially, you know, the word germs, which came out, you know, in March as you might have germs on your groceries, all of a sudden got people to think, well, maybe I should make this myself. Maybe I shouldn't go buy a sandwich. I should literally make the sandwich. And so they're the ones picking the bread. They're the ones looking at the turkey and the lettuce, as opposed to just expecting it to come to them. So they care about that now. That's a major, major, major shift. I would also say sustainability, you know, food waste is really near and dear to my heart. We waste almost half the food that we produce here in America, and most of that is at people's homes. So that's what I try and tackle, is really help people make the most of what they got. You know, I look at Chris and Amy, and they're amazing chefs. They open up their walk-ins, or they will open up their their at-home refrigerators, and they can whip up everything. But the average home cook can't do that. So you're starting to see home cooks be interested in, how do I be less wasteful? And I think a lot of us have grandparents from the Depression era, and they're not wasteful. They carried that with them their whole lives. And now you're going to start to see us, our generation, pick up similar attributes. I think people care about that. A brand can't be wasteful. A restaurant can't be wasteful. All that matters because we know what it's like to run out now.
Yes, the imperative of that has been thrown into very sharp relief. And then, Chris, in terms of the balance of sustainability, environment, people, business, where's your emphasis?
Right now, it's on people and keeping people sustainable. And that goes back to Southern Smoke, a foundation we started in 2015, originally to raise awareness for folks with the MS Society. A friend of mine was diagnosed with MS. And then in 2017, when Harvey came through, we changed the foundation's focus to hospitality relief, where anytime somebody in our industry, whether it be a farmer, whether it be a fisherman, drive-through worker, busser, cook, waiter, I don't care, could apply for help when they got in time of crisis. And we had like 240 applications come in for Hurricane Harvey, and we were able to grant 139 families $500,000. And this year alone, instead of being more of a localized thing, it's a national program at this point, but we've been able to grant over 3,000 families $5.7 million this year, or since last March, I should say. So it's like keeping sustainable with our staff and our families and our restaurant groups and the cooks and the waiters and across the nation to make sure that they're safe. And that's a sustainable thing that we try to work on as well as, you know, working with our farmers that are local, but making sure that our industry is sustainable. And that's been a challenge every day. So.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, thank you so much for all that you're doing. That's a phenomenal level of grants and relief to have been dispersed. So thank you for that. Amy, what's your perspective in terms of the changing lens of sustainability?
I mean, I think for me, the issue of environmental awareness and where we get our food from has been top of mind for a long time. But I think right now, sustainability in me means, you know, how is this industry sustainable? I'm a restaurant owner, so I think of it as, and through my own lens, but how do we make this industry sustainable for the people who are working in it and for the small businesses who are trying to, you know, basically just, you know, maintain a business and be profitable in the same way that other industries are. So I come out of this from you know, we've realized that there's many parts of this that are somewhat broken that need to be repaired. So there are a lot of issues to tackle, and I think the biggest question mark is how do we go about doing that holistically for all of us?
Indeed, I mean, it's very much been the focus of the James Beard Foundation in terms of, you know, our campaign Open for Good. As you said, the emphasis has been so much around survival and helping our industry through this crisis. But as we look to build back, how do we not build back in the same vein, but look in a way that really addresses some of those underlying fragilities, including the employee safety net, including equitable practices and sustainable practices, but they come with a price tag, and the current business model, it's hard to see how that will bear it. So we might talk later on about the sustainable business model and what might be the levers that need to be changed for that to be a reality. So Joel, you were talking about the home cook, taking more of a kind of wartime spirit, being more intentional and mindful around waste. Do you think this trend of home cooking and agency, self-agency in the kitchen, do you think that will continue, or do you think that people, is that a habit that has been formed for good, or do you think people will revert to previous ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I had a crystal ball, I would use it. But my gut and I work with Deloitte really closely, and kind of what the analytics are saying is that it's here to stay. People are learning to cook and are loving to cook. And, you know, I could look to so many people who are on this webinar. We realized what cooking did for us. It brings people together, it feeds people, it nourishes people. And so for the first time, we forced people to cook for themselves. Right? This was like their gateway into cooking. They didn't have a choice. Restaurants are closed. Grocery stores aren't doing prepared foods. You don't have a choice, guys. You gotta cook for yourselves. So they had to get behind the stove. They absolutely had to turn on the oven, and they're starting to realize the benefits, the health benefits, the money benefits. They save money by making things from scratch. So I do think we're going to see a dip, and I really do, for all my restaurant friends, including Chris and Amy on the call. I hope we see a dip in home cooking, and where people just have this urge to go experience something and go really, really be under the fine watch of an amazing chef and what they can bring to the table. but I do think it will then come back up. So I think we'll have that dip of people got to get out of the house. They are so burnt out of cooking, which I definitely believe, but then it's going to go high again and find a middle ground, which is much higher pre-pandemic of people who are actually interested in cooking from scratch.
It'll be interesting to see where it levels out.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting to see the role of Chris and Amy and so many other restaurateurs. Like Chris said, I mean, Chris, I don't even know how many virtual events, or Amy, you guys have done, but you're not just chefs feeding people now, you're helping kind of spread education and knowledge. And so all these new home cooks are going to be looking to their local heroes, which are these guys, for knowledge and for, you know, whether it's picking up great ingredients or how to cut an onion. They're, you know, we've always been looking to them, but now we're really looking to them.
Amy, you were able to pivot your business in DC to accommodate not just only the pandemic, but the election season and the inauguration and the kind of unrelenting pressures on DC. When you think about a sustainable food system in its many dimensions, obviously it will take systemic change. Which players do you think will have the greatest influence to deliver that change? If you think about the politicians, is it the chefs, is it consumers? Obviously, there's an interplay between those constituencies, but who do you look to first and foremost?
It's a really great question. I think, quite frankly, it starts with the chef and the consumers. And I also want to say it also involves the journalists who are putting attention and focus on the things that matter. I think that there has to be, I believe needs to be a public awareness sort of campaign I've looked at for a long time to educate the consumers on the cost of doing business. And for an industry that is known for very small margins, you know, we get not much support in terms of, you know, federal guidance, best practices, educational opportunities for people who want to work in the field. So I think that there's a lot of communication that needs to be done. And, you know, geez, you know, there's so many organizations in my city of Washington, they have think tanks for everything, but they don't have a think tank for this industry, you know. And so I think that we really need to get involved with all these different people who have voices and make sure it's all connecting the right way. And that also brings pressure upon, you know, the government and the legislature to make sure that, you know, this industry has more support, more backbone. I think that is essential. There's a conversation that needs to take place, and the only way to do it is to continue what chefs and all of us have been doing already, but it needs to take place and continue to take place so we can get a more secure system going forward that people understand. Right now, people just see, you know, the barista, or they see.
Oh, we've lost Amy momentarily.
The chef, or, you know, the waiter, and they don't really understand the economics behind things and how they all go together. Yes.
So increased consumer awareness, for sure. We might think about how that might be, how that might look. And in terms of kind of federal recognition and support for this industry, it felt like just this last year, the coming together of all these disparate businesses who in aggregate are incredibly valuable socially, economically, culturally, have been recognized possibly for the first time as a collective, as evidenced by the recent relief package bespoke for restaurants. Do you feel now that that recognition can be parlayed into further support, financial and beyond?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a huge moment for all of us to be able to activate into a group that's advocating for our own welfare and well-being. And I think this is finally the moment that we needed in terms of, you know, chefs and restaurants and all these entities are used to, you know, going to events and socializing and competing and all these things. But for once, we all saw each other in this bubble as all having the same problems and all realizing that there wasn't enough support to figure out how we all get out of this. So it's a huge opportunity, and, you know, the work that has been done on Capitol Hill and the awareness that the restaurant industry is a professional industry that deserves recognition and respect like any other industry, I think is huge.
Very well said. Chris, over to you in terms of the same question, the change that needs to be brought about for our industry, for it to be sustainable across all the dimensions we've been talking about. Who do you look to first and foremost, the consumer, the chef community, or our politicians?
I definitely think it goes back to the consumer. And I think for the first time in history, the consumer actually saw the fragile eggshell that the hospitality industry actually is. It was the first look into what can happen if people don't go out to eat, right? And I think that a lot of the consumers really understood it. I think a lot of them, I shouldn't say a lot, I think some of them did. I think a lot of them just think that, like, you run restaurants, you're just stuffing cash in pillowcases, and and it's like that doesn't happen, it just doesn't. And I think the ask of, hey, can you sponsor a softball league or a little league team has kind of dramatically dropped off, which is kind of nice. But I think that it goes back to people actually understanding and seeing the struggle, and understanding that there's a struggle. And when you start talking political wise, it was like having our politicians start to speak up. That was huge. It couldn't have been bigger. And sitting on a lot of those phone calls, like, and understanding like what was going on, like how can you look at industries that are a tenth the size that have an actual fund, when the hospitality industry does not? And so it was a good thing that it happened. I'd like to see how that's going to play out. Still at this point, I'm really interested and curious, and it's getting getting everybody involved into it, and all these little mom and pop restaurants that are corner shops. And I live in Houston, where the diversity is just a massive population, and it's so beautiful getting all of these folks that are entwined into this bill and getting them to understand it too. And that's how it starts. And so I think there's going to need a lot of leadership on the political side for that, for not just on a larger political scale, but when you start talking like city council members, to be able to go into their districts, to have their small mom and pop corner shop restaurants understand what's going on. So it doesn't really, on a bigger scale, it means a lot, but on a city scale, it means even more. And I think sometimes we forget that, and that's where it needs to really start to happen, because just winning, just getting that battle through doesn't really make the problem solve itself. We have to still get the folks to do it. So
yeah, it doesn't address the systemic questions. But I think you're right, from a consumer perspective, it was so visceral seeing your beloved local restaurant either highly challenged or shuttered, and feeling the personal impact of that. It feels like the appreciation for one's local community and neighborhood restaurants is the appreciation is greater than ever before. Jean, what are your thoughts from a kind of Deloitte and industry perspective in terms of where the change that is needed will be coming from?
Well, I think at first the consumers, right? The consumers are going to drive what they want, how they want it, from a food perspective, from a customer experience perspective. But I think, just as Amy and Chris both said, it was wonderful to see the politicians support the industry. And actually, it was the first time where I felt, as a restaurant industry leader, that we were combined together as awareness to the rest of the consumer population of kind of Chris's comment of stuffing. There's that perception where there's cash being stuffed in mattresses, or that there's cash hidden all over the restaurant, which is just not the case. And so it was great to see the politicians really rally behind the restaurant industry and rally behind the hospitality industry. And I think the pandemic really created that awareness across the consumers, because there was just an expectation that restaurants were always there, and that they were at your disposal whenever you wanted to go out to a restaurant. Until that was taken away and people didn't have that opportunity, I think it created a huge perception of, okay, this is something we love, this is something we enjoy, it's entertainment for us. It's just not us getting a meal out. It's actually part of their livelihood, entertainment, and I think it's going to continue to stay that way, because it was taken away, and yeah. The consumers love the idea of being able to go out, not cook at home, go out for a special event. How many birthdays were missed or anniversaries were missed where they are normally going to a very nice restaurant, trying to get a hot reservation. None of that was happening because it just didn't happen. So I think you're going to see more of it over the coming months as more people get vaccinated, as people slowly open up, capacities increase throughout the restaurant industry, and people are just going to enjoy it. And I think instead of having a 2-hour dinner, people are going to have a 3-hour dinner because they're not going to want to leave. And it's turning the tables is going to be harder in the restaurants because people are going to love that experience. And Chris is shaking his head because he knows somebody's going to go and they're like, oh my gosh, we got the reservation. We get the reservation at Georgia James. Oh my gosh, we're not leaving, right? We're going to stay here for as long as until they kick us out. So
we thought we were going to have to put a time limit on it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a whole nother wave of. I know they've done that in Chicago where I live, where it's just, you get into the nicer restaurants, they tell you have to be out, in a certain period of time because, it's also being respectful to the restaurant owner because they also, they're in a business, they're running a business like Amy mentioned, you're trying to make a profit as well and pay your people and pay your suppliers. That's all part of running the business as well as creating a wonderful customer experience for your consumers as well. So it's going to be, I think the restaurateurs are going to have a challenging balance as we move back into the more normal opening.
In terms of having a redefined contract with the consumer, because in a way, much of this was unspoken before, but now there are very explicit requirements for safety reasons. Does that provide an opportunity to reset that relationship and to reframe the expectations for what a good diner looks like?
I mean, I wanted to say that, to what everyone's point is, chefs, something changed when chefs became essential workers. Just like, it was like doctors and chefs, yeah. Okay? And so, amen, right? And so there's your respect right there. So yes, I think that chefs were rock stars. That's one thing, but that didn't necessarily mean that we had the respect of the consumer. If you wanted to kick a consumer out pre-pandemic, they'd say, great, you're a rock star, but I'm paying the bill. I'm staying as long as I want. Post-pandemic, they're saying, you're a rock star and you're essential and you're important and you keep our economy alive. So yeah, I'll get the heck out of this restaurant if you need me to get out. So I think there is a newfound respect to Amy's point in politics, to Chris's point with consumers, and to Jean's point as kind of the relationship comes together. Chefs are finally getting the respect they deserve, which is the golden lining a little bit.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I deliberate in my own mind so much with this, this conversation as far as the essential worker aspect of it and being treated as such, and it just hasn't happened until, well, it just hasn't happened really, because we had a little, it really made the funniest thing in my mind. About a month ago, we had this little ice storm in Texas. I don't know if y'all remember that. I think everybody here does for sure. But it was, hey, don't go anywhere. Don't put your staff at risk. Don't open anything up. I had no less than 3 phone calls from higher ups of like, hey, can you come feed our staffs for us? And I'm like, did you guys not make sandwiches and think about this beforehand when you told us not to leave? And so it's like, we're essential until we're not. And then when we are needed, then we are. And it really, there's a, I always tell my staff is like, you know what would happen? It'd be kind of funny if we all just, restaurants, grocery stores, everybody shut down for just 2 days. Joel, you would be the busiest human on the face of the planet, teaching people how to cook with Swiss chard stems, right? And that's the truth, right? People just, I don't know what to do. What do we do? We have stuff. What do we do with it? And so it changes that face again, and I battle with that all the time. It's like, I enjoy having people in the restaurants and I enjoy when they want to come in. It's the greatest thing to see again, right? Everybody said, where do you want to go when the pandemic's over? I said, I want to go to my restaurants and see all of them full. And I want to see my staff happy and just humming along like it used to be. That's the greatest vacation I'll ever have in my mind, right? But until we get there, you do have the the people that come in and say, hey, I'm going to sit here for 3 hours. And you're like, no, you're not. Like, I appreciate it, but
Yeah.
and just come back again tomorrow. Like, we'll be here. Like, so it's as we start to open up, it happens, and it's great. It's great to see it. It really is. And Amy, I can't wait till you have 50% in your dining room. And you can see that. It's an amazing thing.
But look, there's some great questions coming in from the audience, so let me field some of these. So Sanoop asks, looking at more urban areas, it seems that sustainability and transparency in food is tougher to come by, specifically in more poverty-stricken areas. How do people in the food industry, oh, that's just flown past, how do people in the food industry, especially those who tend to serve more affluent communities, push transparency and sustainability into these types of environment? Amy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll answer that. That's an excellent question, and I have been very upset about this for a long time. Meaning, the equality of food, the access to food, and in my own community, I reached out to a very small organization, DC Urban Greens. That they work in Ward 7 and 8 in Washington D.C. And who would have thought that there was an urban farm in the middle of, DC, 4.7 miles away from me, but it's there. And it tells a story about access to food. Some of the, citizens in those communities don't have a grocery store that is in walking distance. They don't have a grocery store that has fresh produce. They do not have the time necessarily to cook at home. They need to be given tools, and it needs to be, good food needs to be more accessible to them. So there's a farm, that I just spoke of in DC. I work with them. They deliver food to us once a week, all kinds of different things, like anything that you can get from a luxury, so-called, a luxury vendor or whatever you can get from DC Urban Greens. And so I think urban farming and understanding that these things can happen in urban areas is a big part of connecting with a larger community. And, it's been one of the best things of my career, is being able to support this kind of venture.
Thank you. Chris, have you had similar experiences, and anything that you feel is kind of scalable?
I mean, I live in a really large city. It has a lot of land. You're talking 680 square miles. And so it's definitely, it's a challenge. The food deserts and not having accessibility to food is definitely one of the biggest things in our area. But I think it starts at a younger age, and there's a young lady, she's a teacher, Kelly Carabias, here in Houston, that works with the school districts to teach the youngsters, like the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, how to farm and how to eat real vegetables. I mean, they grow everything on site, and it's one of those things, like, they have chickens at the schoolhouse where they're teaching them like what a collard green actually tastes like fresh. Like, and so I think it starts with education and understanding that the want and desire for fresh and fresh food really is and how to make it accessible, and where to find it, and how to get it, and how to cook it, really. How not just to open a can, how not to open, a bag of snacks, but what does that look like? And I think it starts, and that's where education is the most important part. So one day we'll all get there. Got to happen fast, though.
That is the aspiration. Right, some more questions from the audience. Fernando asks, can we roundtable what measures panelists have done to hold on to their business? Did they request rent forgiveness, layoffs, extended vendor payments? One thing that they can recommend for others for any potential next pandemic. So again, thinking about the business model, I know I don't want to be talking about the next, but in terms of future proofing and thinking about those incredibly tight margins that mean it's hard to accommodate many of the costs that we would look to bear for some of the other provisions. What economic levers have you pulled to get through this? Maybe I'll start with you, Chef Amy.
All of the above. I mean, having a good relationship with your landlord goes a long way. And I've heard not so great stories from name chefs all over the city that, landlords are being very, very difficult, which is, it's sad to hear. But, I did negotiate some rent relief with my landlord. Geez, what else have I done? We did a lot of delivery and things like that. In the beginning, when this hit, we did communicate with our vendors and just ask them to just relax things for a week or so we could get used to things. In addition, I think one of the things that's important, although it sounds kind of crazy at this moment when we're all in such financial, difficulty, is trying to save a little bit of a nest egg so that when these things happen, you might be able to feel a little bit more comfortable. But I just took advantage of every single thing that was offered to me, every single grant that came through the city, all of it. And I guess that's what you have to do. You just have to understand that things are going to be different for a little while. And laying people off, that happened too, and that was really terrible. It's horrible. But I wanted to stay open to make sure they had a job to come back to. And the layoffs were really hard, and they're mostly all back now. But it wasn't a pretty situation for a few months there.
Yeah, none of us have been immune from that. Chris, what have been some of your survival mechanisms?
Man, borrow, scratch, steal, whatever it takes. It's kind of how the mentality we have. Is the most important thing is like just not having to do layoffs. Some people left on their own accord, just wanted to find a different thing, a more sustainable industry. And we went from about 180 employees, and we still have 160. Just trying to keep everybody employed. It was like sitting on the back porch one night, early May, drinking a whiskey, and I was like, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work. We still have to do private parties, and so I kind of went down the path of Joel, and we spent 3 years working on a home and turned it into a studio in the kitchen, and just started. I was like, we're gonna do all of our private parties here, just over Zoom, and teaching people how to cook, and the people still have to get together, and so we just did almost all of our business dinners where we would take boxes to your house of food, and then we would all get on the camera, and I would teach you how to cook it all. And we did that, I don't know, 150 times, I feel like, at a crew set up in our house.
In some ways, that has fostered a deeper relationship with some of your consumers.
Yes. We did a lot for private and a lot for public. We did cookbook classes, and I started cooking out of other people's cookbooks just because I got tired of cooking out of ours. And we have them come on and like, hey, join the class with us, wee! And it was, but it was super fun. But it was a lot of our consumers, that was the only experience like socially that they had outside for as far as food goes. They weren't going to restaurants, and so this was the way that they could dine out. And so we've created all sorts of different business models at this point. I started a sausage company. We started however, we'll just make it work.
Yeah, so there was no playbook. So it's like, okay, let's just get scrappy. Let's experiment. Let's see where there's traction. Joel, what has been, obviously, again, different guys, but what has been your experience in terms of some adopting new business models or different new initiatives in light of the pressures?
Yeah, it's rad. It's what Chris is doing and Amy's doing. It's the right thing to do. Think about back in the day. Think about think about today. Think about Jamie Oliver. Okay, he's a guy with restaurants, but he has so many other revenue streams, right? He has cookbooks, he has TV shows, he's got quick dinners, he's got all these things. I believe that the pandemic kind of forced restaurants, and I, obviously defer to Chris and Amy, to become more than just feeding people. You have to experience Chris and Amy outside of the four walls of their restaurant. Whether that means you're picking up a meal on the go at your local grocery store. That is a trend. I just went to my grocery store, and now I get to experience this little bistro that I'm obsessed with, like on a weekly basis. That's kind of cool. Like that's rad, like I don't have to get that res. I can make that salad in my own home, I know another restaurant nearby that offers boat ticket to, they're right on the water, so you can buy a boat ticket to get up to them. So there's another revenue stream. And so I believe, like any business, restaurants need to diversify from just putting food in front of diners. And I think that this has forced the hand of restaurateurs to think creatively. I mean, look what Danny Meyer's doing with Shake Shack. I mean, I don't think they can come up with any more ways to monetize a burger. So I think it's important for the future of restaurants to really think, how can you experience me as a chef and me as a brand outside of just the plate?
Right. What's the brand manifestation beyond the four walls of the restaurant? It's been amazing to see the ingenuity going into some of those revenue diversifications, as you talked about, from takeout to retail to experiential in a safe way, liquor license, et cetera, et cetera. So on the one hand, there's been revenue diversification, and on the other hand, there's been cost retention and shrinking, and more reduced menus, more modest offerings, obviously in line with reduced capacity. Of these different elements, which ones do you think have got the most legs in terms of this is really proven to work and we're going to stick with it?
Well, I'll say, my restaurant was originally a market restaurant, so I always had a grocery store component to it. And wow, did I appreciate that once this all happened. And so I think that's here to stay, is more grocery outlets in a small way. And I think something else that might be here to stay that I tried and has been successful is, we ship all over the United States. That's been a huge thing for a lot of restaurants, I think, to grow their revenue stream. And so I think national shipping of products, that might be another thing that is going to stay. And I hope, we have had some relaxing of the alcohol laws around here, and as long as we can be responsible, I think it makes a lot of sense, in terms of being able to, consume, buy a bottle of wine and with your to-go order and be able to do that. We can't do that in DC usually, but I hope that's here to stay. So.
No, she just switched. Joel.
I would just say one strategy for everyone out there is start small with whatever new revenue stream you're thinking about. I look at Chris and he's doing virtual events, and don't go buy the nicest camera, the nicest computer. Do a couple of them, make sure that they work, and then scale up. And so whatever you try, I mean, I could sit here and tell you 30 different ideas of how you can monetize your restaurant outside of feeding people, but it differs from market to market, from place to place. So you got to do really low overhead. Just give it a little amuse-bouche, just give it a little taste, measure it. If it works, scale it out.
Right, iterate. Thinking back actually to the earlier comment, Jean, when we were talking about the whole supply chain and ecosystem and how sustainability manifests, and one area was around packaging. And we've seen this boom in terms of delivery, takeout, and I just know as a personal consumer, just feeling, God, this is not good, the level of stuff I'm recycling, stuff that is recyclable. Have you seen any innovations in that space in terms of sustainable packaging, given the increased demand?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen a lot of tests. I haven't seen anything rolled out wholesale across, say, for example, the big QSRs that are the major consumers of large packaging. But there are definitely, we have been advising and helping, trying to figure out what is the best sustainable packaging. And then if you go to Europe, the laws are actually in place, say, for example, in France, for sustainable packaging, and it's moving its way through the EU. It's coming here as far as, what sustainable packaging needs to look like. So I think there's two components. One, there's, okay, sustainable packaging, what's best for the environment, what's best for maintaining the food. But then there's also, with delivery, and delivery times can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, you have the providers of the food wanting the food to stay fresh because they want it to be good to the consumers. And packaging hasn't really evolved in the past couple of years as far as, okay, how am I going to maintain this food so it maintains the freshness from when it leaves the restaurant to when it actually hits the consumer in their home. And so we've seen two work streams, one on the sustainability side of packaging, and the other one as far as maintaining the freshness of the food, the quality of the food, so it tastes the way it would as if we had it as a dine-in experience. So I don't know what the other chefs have seen in their world, but that's what I've seen for a broader consumer and across QSR, which, like I said, is the largest consumer of the packaging in the restaurant industry today.
Chris, Joel, Amy, have you seen anything interesting or anything that looks like the future of packaging?
I've really
I've got a
this.
big perspective on that because food waste it happens a lot on the shelf. In my video, I talked about a company. They're actually called Appeal, A-P-E-E-L, Appeal. They use the stems and they use the seeds of fruits to create a coating on the outside of the fruit. You spray it and it lasts a lot longer and it doesn't use plastic. Before the pandemic, which was when we shot that video, I thought this could be the future. I mean, this is it. I mean, this is, how cool is that? An apple lasts a lot longer because it's wrapped in an apple, right? I mean, that's really cool. But the pandemic did kind of create this double-edged sword of people are scared of germs. And I have no idea why zucchini is in a big plastic, big plastic wrap. It makes no sense to me. But at the same time, I think a lot of people don't. But now people are scared that everyone's touching the citrus, touching the apples. So I don't know. I definitely think that there is a move to consumers don't want waste, and manufacturers want their food to last longer. At the same time, we're battling this kind of like PTSD from the pandemic of germs, which is on everyone's mind. So I think it's going to move a little slower than it would have without the pandemic, to be honest. But that's just my gut reaction.
Interesting perspective. Chris, any thoughts?
I would love to see a more sustainable aspect of to-go containers and stuff for us, but also at an affordable price, which those two things don't come together, because when you start charging extra because of packaging, people don't understand that as much. I mean, how many quart containers and pint containers and little plastic deli containers do you have at your house right now? Right? I basically just use them as storage in my own refrigerator. And I just think that was having something that, man, I'd love to see it, right? Because it's such a cost right now. And it doesn't translate well to the consumer. It just doesn't. It has not yet. If you say, well, it's an extra $1 for packaging, people are like, what?
It's not a value add.
It's $1.
To pay for.
You already spent $50. What's $1, right? People just it doesn't seem like that translate very well. So it goes back to education to the consumer and understanding the product. I think we all went with biodegradable straws.
Yeah.
And basically at the beginning they just disintegrated in your drink. And people were like, no. And then now we're starting to see that technology come to full circle and be a much better product, and not as a higher cost. So I think that's what's going to happen with this to-go packaging, and it needs to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of demand from an economic perspective for the integrity of the food, and critically from an environmental standpoint as well. I'm conscious of time. We've got 4 or 5 minutes left. I'd just love to hear from each of you. I mean, we are at this juncture now where our industry in the world is starting to open up again. Restaurants are rebuilding, and we've got this unique opportunity for a reset. As we've all talked about, this pandemic has thrown into very sharp relief some of the fragilities of our industry. I'd love to hear from you each. Just what is the one thing that you would prioritize for yourself and others in terms of building back a better industry for the food and restaurant industry? So, Amy, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, for me, the one thing is I think is patience, patience from the consumers to us to be able to get back to where we need to be, patience with one another as we're working to understand that we're under enormous amounts of stress and we're all doing the best we can, and patience with all the people that we work with, as this has been a once, well, I don't know, hopefully a once in a lifetime experience for me, and I think we sometimes downplay what is happening to us, and we all need to practice a little patience and empathy, I think, to get back to a better place, not just get back where we were, but go to a different place.
Humanize it and some compassion for what we've all been through and what we're going through. Joel, what's the one thing that you would prioritize in terms of building back better?
Yeah, I'm going to say education. I mean, everyone talked about it in their own way, but I don't think if the consumer doesn't understand what the problem is, why that there's no chicken on the shelf, or why a grocery store has to limit, or not a grocery store, a restaurant has to limit their menu we have to educate the consumer on the supply chain a little bit more. We have to people need to understand that food doesn't just come in a plastic wrap. There's a huge, huge issue here in America. And so how can we tell that story, not just through media like I do, but through restaurants like Amy and Chris does, through analytics like Gene does, and then incredible foundations like the James Beard Foundation? We're all thought leaders in our own perspective. How do we get in front of lots of people, tell lots of people, and a lot of people on this webinar as well, and educate them on these issues? Because guys, you know, the world melted and all the holes in the system became very apparent. And so I also think it's a really good time to be optimistic. So many opportunities for people out there to be a part of the system, to fix it. You know, 40% of the food is getting wasted in America. Can someone help us, you know, get that out to the food desert? So I think it's a really exciting time on the end of this, and you can say that now on the end of this, but I think you're going to see new industries, new innovations, and you just got to be open to it, work fast, and like I said, experiment. But yeah, good luck.
Thank you. So we've got patience, empathy, education. Chris, what's the one thing that you would prioritize?
Balance. Trying to figure out how to do it all. You know, and understanding that you have to make different economic streams, if you will. The idea of just running the restaurant is a little bit that doesn't work, you know. And I think we learned that, like, you can't be just solely like focused on that. And how do you diversify that? I mean, it's funny that all these conversations, and like as we're talking, this week, our plan of business is opening a place that does to-go food, has a film studio in it, has a national distribution set up in it. Like, all of this is in one building. And so you guys are just telling me, yeah, you're doing it right. Do that. Like, and so it's like, how do you diversify that financial stream to make sure that your staff is safe, right? Because at the end of the day, you're nothing without your team. And so I got to make sure that our team is there, and that we're there for our community. And how do we make that impact on not just our staff, but our consumers and our producers? Our producers need that outlet, and we can't not be there for them to grow that tomato to give to me, you know, for me to give that to somebody else. And that it's the whole circle. We can't break the chain. It has to keep going. And so how do we do that? How do we make that more balanced for them too? Because, you know, seed farmers not coming back anymore.
Right.
Can't do that.
Thank you. And then finally, Jean, what would be your one priority for a better system at the end of this?
I think better data. I mean, that's the world I live in, is data and analytics and technology, but there is so much growth right now in predictive analytics. And so I think using that data, using that predictive analytics to help source food, to say, okay, what do we need where is it available? Where is it freshest? Let's use it when it's available. I think that's going to be a focus going forward as well.
Data-driven optimization. Wonderful. Thank you all very much indeed. That was a rich and diverse discussion on the future of food and all that entails. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And huge thanks again to our panelists this afternoon. Thank you, and go well.